What a week. Well, today there's a couple of things I want to talk about today, and I'm very delighted to have with me Dexter Cousins. Welcome. Thanks for joining me today, Dexter.
It's an absolute delight to be with you today, Kylie.
So both of us, Dexter and I, are here today because we crossed each other's paths only last week. Both of us were recognised, and congratulations, Dexter, for the recognition of your work this year and being acknowledged on LinkedIn's Top 20 Voices 2020.
Congratulations back. It's a bit surreal, to be honest. I feel I've got imposter syndrome.
Oh, well, perfect thing to say, Dexter. So before I just give you a bit of a wrap on telling people a bit more about who you are, and of course I would like you to kind of fill us in mostly on that. So, but one thing I would like to say to kick off on what I really want to talk to you about today, and for our listeners, the thing that I think is going to make the biggest difference in this conversation. You sent me some information about your career and what you've been at work on and your journey, and the fact that you say imposter syndrome to start is fantastic, because one of the things that stood out in when you were telling me about your story is this comment that you said, and I'm actually going to read it verbatim because I think it was fabulous. We are all just punching above our weight.
Yeah.
Should we just start there? So that's where I want to go there, right? So before you do that, please tell me what it is you do, why you do it, and then we'll get stuck into this thing about punching above our weight.
Sam, founder and managing director of Tier 1 People, and we're recognized as Australia's leading executive search firm for FinTech. So we work with world-class organizations like Revolut, Klarna, as well as some of the domestics here in Australia, and really help them bring in the right leadership for the right stage of growth. So I've been in the recruitment industry about 20 odd years, always recruiting leadership. And look, I think the thing that I'm passionate more than anything else is really helping businesses be successful, particularly, startup businesses and on that journey of growth. And look, that's the thing that really gets me pumped up and excited about what I do.
Now, I have to ask you, did I just cut you off?
Nope.
Fantastic. Okay, so we got what your passion is, and there's a lot in what you've already shared with me, Dexter, that I actually want to talk to you about. But before we do that, can we go on to this comment about punching above your weight? What were you referring to there?
Yeah, look, we've had a spectacular year, actually. It's myself, the business is myself and my wife, and we've built a brand that is globally recognized as one of the leading brands in FinTech. And we've done that with minimal budgets, minimal marketing spend. So this year we were recognized as finalists in the kind of the pinnacle of FinTech awards. We missed out, but we were up against some of the world's biggest law firms and professional services firms. And the winners actually congratulated us and said, look, we thought you guys were going to win it. So we've also, I guess, got a client base, which is the absolute, kind of pinnacle and cream of FinTech businesses out there. And really, when I kind of look and think who we're competing against and the resources that they have, the legacy that they have as well, to me, it's, that's the kind of one accomplishment that I feel that, and it's the power that I take from what I'm doing, is that it doesn't matter what resources you have or you don't have. If you have a vision and you're committed to it and you're passionate about it, you can punch above your weight. Viewers will hear that I'm not Australian, although I am a citizen. I've lived here since 2004. And I actually consider myself to be more of an Australian than I would consider myself to be British. And I think one of the reasons for that is the spirit of Australia. It's all about punching above your weight. And I just remember being a kid, in the 80s, and at the time, England were on top in cricket and the Ashes. And then I went through like a 15-year period where we just got humped every series. Right? It was embarrassing. And I just always, always admired that kind of Aussie spirit and determination where, the kind of, didn't matter what resources you had. If you had the kind of grit and the determination and the belief that you could achieve great things.
So just on that, because I do think you've kind of made an interesting connection there about the punching above the weight, the spirit of Australia, but specifically that story that you shared about being in a team who were getting flogged. Do you think that what did that do for you?
Look, I mean, if you're talking about a cricket perspective, it made me pretty miserable.
Well, you certainly didn't end up going professional in cricket, right?
Yeah, I didn't. Look, but I think what it did do for me was really to instill or give you the, what's the word? That kind of spark, right? That thing whereby, and I look back, right, and it's all of the inspiration that I get comes from these moments where it was people that were facing adversity. And rather than sitting and complaining or fighting against it like everybody else was doing, that they took the situation and then made something from it, and they made something better. So an example would be, I remember I was 8 years old, right? And was brought up in Newcastle in the north of England, where we had shipbuilding and coal mining. Now, if anybody's watching The Crown on Netflix, Margaret Thatcher's featuring prominently in it.
Yes.
She was brutal, right? I mean, this is a region that had 40% unemployment, and the miners went on strike, and basically she sent in the police and riot police, and they beat up, like severely beat miners. And these were guys that, didn't have an income. Their families were literally starving, right? So it was grim. I mean, it was dead grim. And I remember I was at my grand's, and there was a guy there who was doing a feat, and a chiropodist. And I asked what he was doing. He said, "Oh, I'm a chiropodist." I said, "Oh, well, how do you become a chiropodist?" I said, "Well, I used to be a miner, and then I either could go on strike or they offered me a redundancy. So I took the redundancy and I trained to become a chiropodist, because my gran has always had bad feet and she's always had to walk to the doctors. So what I did was train to become a chiropodist. I bought a car and I set up a mobile chiropodist business. So now, your gran doesn't have to walk to come and see me. I drive to her, and it means that she doesn't have pain and I can fix her feet." I was 8 years old and I was just blown away, right? It still stuck with me that, wow, I was kind of surrounded by, there was just no hope, right? It was desperation. And here was somebody that had taken that situation and turned it around. And I think that kind of the Aussie cricket team, did that as well. Even times when England got on top, they found something in them that was just, Warnie would come in and just come up with some magic. And England's spirits were just, we were broken, right? We were shattered. We were just beaten. I mean, we were beaten every time we went on the pitch, even when we were winning. So I think that those kind of, those moments have kind of been what have got me to that point of where I'm at now. And it's interesting when you kind of reflect back on your journey to see how, these metaphors, you kind of attach a meaning to them, particularly in those moments when you're down or you think, hey, this isn't working, or I've screwed up, or I'm failing, that you draw some kind of strength from that, some inspiration, get back on the horse and kind of just get back on with the vision.
Yeah, it's interesting you do share that story, because there were so many parallels in what I could see from what you shared in that story and what you're now doing. You're working with a group of individuals who I dare say probably feel like they're that losing cricket team every single moment of every part of the day.
Yeah, look, absolutely.
And not only that, you then shared about Warnie being the miracle maker, and it occurs to me like that's who you now have become for these people. Is that?
I wouldn't say that. Absolutely. Oh. There's no way I'd ever compare myself with Warnie. Right? It's never happening. Yeah.
On many levels, shall we say?
Yeah. I remember, so it was the Ashes in 2006. It was the first Ashes I'd ever gone to in Sydney. It was the 5-0 thrashing. And I think Shane Warne was up for Australian of the Year. And I actually got stopped because we went in fancy dress, and, Channel 7 stopped me and said, "Hey, what do you think of Warnie being Australian of the Year?" And I said, "Well, how can you not give it to the guy? He's the greatest spin bowler in the world, and he's dating Liz Hurley. What more do you have to do?"
All right, now let's flip back to your career and what you're doing and the work that you're up to. I've got a couple of questions, and so one of the things that, I suppose most people expect is, we talk about uncharted leadership, which in this current climate is very much what's required, right? How does one lead through anything without having any certainty, and be effective in doing that? And outside of the traditional paradigms of any kind of role or anything. But the other part of this for me too, Dexter, is a willingness to kind of start to talk about the things that most people just wouldn't want to talk about or might get uncomfortable talking about, right? And when I was reading about some of your work and what you're doing, I think the first thing I'd have to be authentic and say is I have an interest about what had you go into this space. Like, you've been in recruitment for a lot of years. What had you go into FinTech? Because, we're just really only at the tail end of, in Australia, right? The banking commission, the industry itself has gone through, a shitstorm. There's a lot of people called out for inappropriate behaviors, manipulation. Like, what had you, who certainly occurs, you are, from everything that we've seen, and we're going to talk about more, an integral human being with a massive heart. How did it occur for you going into an industry that was dealing with all that stuff?
Right. So, great question. I'll go back to 2012. I just moved jobs. I joined a really small boutique business. Now, my clients previously had all been the big four banks and Macquarie, all the big names, all the big financial institutions. And I joined as a partner, a 3-person business. My second kid was on the way, and it was, it was stress time, right? It was, life's just got seriously real. Mm-hmm. And I thought it would be a cakewalk. I'd go into these big four banks who I'd worked with for years, and the business would come in, and I just got, stonewalled every attempt. And when I did work with them, it became really apparent that the relationship that they entered into was one that was not really a commercial. If you're in a small business, there's no way, 60-day payment terms, right? No guarantees of work. You're up against 3 other recruitment firms. It was just, commercial suicide. And so I was forced into actually having to pivot, and I started to work with smaller businesses. And at the time, FinTech wasn't even a thing. But I was starting to work with the likes of Virgin Money and some kind of smaller financial institutions that were a lot more entrepreneurial, and really kind of, I'd say, a lot more agile in the way in that they were going about dealing with their customers. Values-wise, probably felt that I shared, but where the real synergy came in was that these were all challenger brands. And it kind of goes back to, the Aussie cricket team, or, where I could just see that, they were fighting for survival, but in that was this one spirit, but two, this great innovation, right? And I think what that did was kind of spark in me that I could see, this change that was happening. Around about 2015, I put in a business plan to the managing director of the firm that I worked for. We'd spent about the last 2 years advising all of our executive network that there's this big change coming, right? AI, machine learning, automation. You're not going to be paid 300 grand a year to manage a team of 100. You've already had your team decimated by being offshored. And so we could see that this was going to have a massive impact, right, on just the work structure and the hierarchy of corporations. And the business plan that I put was FinTech is the future. We've got to go in this, right? MD said, great, I agree with you, except there's no money in startups. So you still got to bill me $500,000 a year, and you can do this as well. And at that point, I thought, you know what? I've always wanted to have my own business. I really believe in this. I'll just go and build it for me and my family. So that was at the end of 2015. We launched kind of officially mid 2016. And probably spent, I'd say, the first 18 months, it still really hadn't got much momentum. And it wasn't until 2018 that I think the industry really started to get its legs. At the same time, the Royal Commission came about as well. And I think one of the things with FinTech is, look, that's the kind of, if the Royal Commission is all of the bad stuff about financial services, then FinTech's the other side, right? It's like correcting the bad.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so, if you look, a lot of the issues that came out of the Royal Commission, FinTech is actually an easy solution. for a lot of these problems.
Mm.
What was really interesting as well is, looking at the Royal Commission, I could see many parallels with the financial services industry, particularly financial advice and mortgage broking and recruitment. And why I think you could see that the model was broken clearly through the Royal Commission. I think we got a similar challenge with recruitment as well, which is, recruiters essentially we're brokers, right?
Mm.
We're in the middle of a transaction and we've got to make it sure that it's right for everyone. But unfortunately, the way in which we're compensated or rewarded is just by making the deal happen. Mm-hmm. Not by getting the right person,
right,
but making the deal happen. And so when the person signs the contract, you send out an invoice and you get paid, right? Regardless of whether they're right or not.
Yes.
And so I could see many parallels with that model to see, hey, this is broken. We need to work in a different way.
Yes.
And so what, the kind of, I guess the genesis of the business, probably around about 3 years back, then became the business that it is today, which was just a different approach to hiring, where we work with a smaller group of clients. We act as an extension of their HR function. We work exclusively, we work retained. We do get some success fees, but most of what we're paid is upfront, or we charge day rates or kind of project fees as well. Mm. And what that does is it just means that we're in it with the client. Everybody's got a stake in it. Unlike working with the big four banks where it's all at risk to me, we kind of wear the risk together, and we go on that journey together as well.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's a interesting parallel I think you've brought up, ironically, with where we started on this game of punching above our weight. It occurs, like, I think certainly with the fact that you're working with a lot of challenger brands. And look, I want to acknowledge this, because certainly I'm not, one of the things that I've noticed, and this is actually something I wouldn't mind talking about with you, is one of the things that I've noticed that's one of the biggest problems for people who are in that game, right? Which there's a lot of people in that game these days, right?
Yeah.
The traditional pathways of, just going to university, just landing yourself into a corporate gig. We're now in an environment where there's a lot more, lower barriers to entry to creating businesses, starting.
Yeah.
Right. So by default, we're now dealing with this kind of challenger model where there's more people challenging the way that business was running. And so we've got an environment like that, which kind of says to me, one would often, if we look at the relationship between growth, the comfort zone versus learning, growth, right? As a challenger, given that you're looking at innovation and growth, one's kind of always going to be out of their comfort zone, right?
Yeah.
But the thing that I just want to acknowledge in this conversation, Dexter, is often one of the things that happens the most is that these same people are very hard on themselves. And they're working really, really hard, but there seems to be, I don't know, just is it stress and burnout, or the expectation that they should be able to have it all handled, or we should be able to have it all handled, when in fact, when you look at the reality, you go, holy shit, is anyone ever going to have it handled in that environment? Yeah,
look, I think you're spot on, right? And we've seen some really like shocking data, right? Which is people that are moving out of, say, a large corporate environment, if their first move out of that environment is into a startup environment, by startup, I'd say 50 people or less, 9 out of 10 people will fail in the first 3 months. Wow. Right? Because the shift is just that great. And look, people are hard on themselves, but I think the reality is it's a brutal environment, right? And you have to be harsh on yourself because there's absolutely nowhere to hide. And I've been through this experience myself in my own business, right? Where the ego kicks in and I think I know everything, and hey, we're going to build a platform and it's a gig economy and it's all this stuff. And you meet with VC and they're pumping you up and you're like, yeah, I'm the man. And, you go out there and you hit the switch and nobody's interested, right? And you built something that nobody wants or needs, right? But it's been fueling your ego. And I've done this myself. I see it happen so many times in that environment as well. Yeah. And I think what happens is you become, just through that experience, you then, you kind of, you become not battle hardened, but you recognize that, I want to talk about the F word here. I think it's a really good segue into it. So I meet with a lot of executives, particularly from the larger institutions, who want to bring in this culture like a startup where there's no fear of failure, right? And I'm like, what? Like, the thing that drives a startup every day is the fear of failure.
Right.
Now, when I dig down and ask, well, what do you mean by failure? What they're talking about in large corporates is people making a mistake. And if they make a mistake, they get fired, or they don't get promoted, or they lose their bonus. Say, look, you don't have a problem with failure. Like, failure for you is getting a 12-month payout and then finding another gig, right? Like sitting on your yacht, right? So, we're kind of putting it into context, whereas failure for one of my clients, look, it's even resulted in suicide, right? I mean, it's it's serious, it's a serious thing that we're talking about.
Yes.
And so I think that, one of the reasons why that gap of, 9 out of 10 people coming from this environment here and going into a startup fail is just because the stakes have just increased massively, right? That thing you've talked about learning, you don't get a 6-month training program. You don't get 6 months to put your feet under the table.
Yes.
Literally having to learn on the job. And guess what? You're going to make lots of mistakes. Now, if you've come from an environment where if you make a mistake, you're going to lose your job, or you're going to lose your bonus, or you're not going to get that promotion, what kind of behavior do you think that might generate in a culture? Is it a one where you're transparent and you own your mistakes and you deal with them? Perhaps does it create a culture where you might hide the mistake or blame someone else? And that learned behavior, I think, is the number one reason why 9 out of 10 fail. It's not that they're bad people, right? It's not that they're the wrong person. It's just that they've not had, the experience of being in that environment where you just have to own it and deal with it and move forward and fess up and, just take it and give yourself. I think that the thing that people are hard on, where they're not hard on themselves as startups, is they're not hard on themselves for making mistakes, right? Yet they set themselves really audacious goals. But I think what I've found is they don't celebrate mistakes. They don't celebrate failure and all of these crappy narratives that we keep hearing out there. They just own it and they fix it and they learn from it and they move forward. And I think there's a lot of rhetoric that's out there, Katie, which is really damaging, which, it's people who've never been in the environment just trying to glorify it.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges that leaders face.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I look, I'm with you on that. I deter from anything that's kind of, I don't know, the first thing that comes to mind visually is unicorns.
Yeah.
Being all overly optimistic or focusing on how fabulous things could be. It's like, it's not, that's not cutting through.
Yeah.
And we know scientifically that it doesn't either.
Yeah.
We know that science tells us, as far as the brain goes, it's the biggest pitfall it could have is being in that space when you're not then dealing with reality. The reality. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's shit. It's very difficult.
Yeah. And this is a podcast about leadership. And if we talk about FinTech, the awards that we had recently, the 2 leadership awards went to the leaders of 2 businesses that are absolutely purpose-driven. So Catherine McConnell of Bright, which is essentially almost like a buy now, pay later scheme, but for solar power. So if you want to get solar power for your home, makes it affordable, you can buy it, get it installed, right? One of the most awesome people on the planet. Like, she's incredible. And then the CEO of the year went to Anthony Nance, who's the chief exec of Wiser, which is they're a lending business, but they've got an app where, if you've seen this feature, roundups, where if you buy a coffee, it's $3.50, they'll round it up to $4 and put it into an investment account.
Oh, right.
What Wiser have said, hey, and that's great, but the biggest problem in Australia is actually household debt. So what if we round up people's spending to pay off their debt rather than, investing? And look, these purpose-driven organizations, both of them I would consider friends. I mean, both of them are just wonderful human beings. But as leaders, look, they live it, breathe it, right? There isn't anything about them that is false or a pretense. Yeah, they're two of the most transparent people you'd ever want to meet. But also, I mean, the inspiration that you get, right? Just talking to them. I mean, for me, it's a privilege to class them as friends, right? I mean, just awesome humans. And neither of them have been leaders of big corporate institutions. This has been their first CEO gig. And what they've done is they've just intuitively said, look, I've seen how it's been done wrong. And I've seen the things that really, uninspired me. But what has inspired me, and this whole thing around purpose, then you get a collection of people who, doesn't matter what background you are. So, I'll go back to Bright. Catherine has an exec team that's over 60% female. They've got a 50-50 split male, female, and over 20 nationalities in that business, of a business of 80 people, right? It's kind of pretty remarkable. Now, that hasn't been a focus of, we got to go after diversity. It's just been, here's a purpose. This is what we're trying to do. We want to create an environment where we get the best people and we make this a place where they can do their best work. And the result is diversity. The result is, an exec team that's 60% female, right? The result is you get Mike Cannon-Brookes investing in you, right? So I think this thing around purpose it's not a fad. I think it's the absolute essence to anybody leading in this world that we're in now, because it's more complex to lead now than it ever has been.
Absolutely. And given that you have brought that up, I want to deal with another F word, which you said called fessing up. So it's now time to fess up, and we're going to put the spotlight on your leadership. So, and I'm going to frame it around this year, right? So, but two things where I want to go, given that you've brought up purpose, is the transition that happened for you, the thing that you finally got where you had to fess up for yourself, because I know you brought up a very humorous conversation that happened with some individual that said certain things to you. So I want to talk about that, and from there I do want to then talk about how that's really been let's say, let's just say there's a direct correlation to that and who you showed up as this year, and getting recognized as the top 20 voices, right? So let's start with what happened around getting your purpose.
Yeah, so look, I think I touched on this before when I went on the Ego Fest, and it still embarrasses me now to talk about it. I mean, it's just, but it's, it's kind of grown me as a human being, and it's really helped me kind of connect. The ironic thing is, right, I was actually mocking people for doing the same thing that I was doing at the time. And, so talk about humility, right? Like being humble. But what happened was I got to the point, I was having lots of conversations, and I just knew I was right. And people didn't understand my industry, and you're not from my industry. It's different. It's not like yours. You don't get it. And I had this conversation with somebody I'd never met before. It was at some event, and they asked me to give the elevator pitch, and I gave it. And it was, one of those like esoteric things that we help companies be the top companies in the world through the power and purpose and all this stuff. And he was like, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Tell me what you do, right? And I was, you don't get it, right? And so we had this dialogue that went for about 5 minutes. And it was just me saying, look, you're right. You don't understand it. You don't understand it. And this person asked me a question. And they said, do you mind if I just ask you one question? I was like, yeah, go on. By this time, I'm like, this person just is a, moron. Get out of here. I'll extend them the courtesy of asking the question. Yeah, just one question for you. Do you want to be right, or do you want to be successful? And I've got to say, right, if you talk about a moment where your life changes, it was that. It was like, remember the movie where the guy would hit the gong and it would go dong, right? It was like literally that kind of feeling, right? The initial reaction was one of rage.
Yeah.
Who do you think you are, right?
Yeah.
Who do you think you are to say that to me?
Yes.
And I went away, right? And I thought about it. And what happened was a sequence of meetings of people that I really trust and respect had all been saying the same thing, right? And all been given the same advice. And I just wouldn't listen. And
They don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah,
They don't get me.
But what also happened was then I looked and seen that 6 to 9 months of going on this ego fest, the impact that it had had on the business. We were like 5 weeks out to Christmas. I'm looking at the bank account. I'm looking at the pipeline of work, and I'm going, God, how are the kids going to get gifts, right? My wife went back to work, and it was, for somebody whose ultimate drive was to be, the dad I never had, the dad that's always going to be there for the kids, who's always going to do the best for them. I think that was the moment where I went, I've failed, right? Like, you've been a dickhead here. You've just been a selfish prick, right?
Yeah.
And that was the moment of like the real kind of humility piece. It was more humiliation than humility, I'm gonna say.
Yes.
But what it did do was it got me to then focus. And those people who'd help, I took that advice. And there was some, just fantastic people who've just been to the Harvard, get together at Harvard with like the world's top leaders, who was saying, hey, look, here's an example that describes you. Right? And here's what they did. And I still didn't want to listen to it, right? So it was then taking those examples and really kind of formulating that into, right, what is it that we're doing? And I think the first thing was, put a badge on the business, right? Just stick to one thing, not to try and be everything to everybody, not to be, catering to everybody's taste, but just to say, this is what I do, this is it, right? And we're not going to deviate from it. That one act alone had real power, because previously I'd been saying yes to everything. And this got me to go, actually, maybe I should say no to that. So that was, the first powerful thing. And then the next was really trying to figure out the purpose. And I went through the exercises, as I have done for probably the last 20 years. And I've got to be honest with you, Kylie, not once have I gone through that exercise and gone, yeah, this is it, right? Not once. It's always seemed like I'm following a process and I'm coming up with something that maybe other people, always aspirational. And the thing that really helped me was to take it out of what my business or what I should be, and more focus on what was the impact that I wanted to have. And so, when I looked at what was happening in FinTech, certainly in the UK, I could see that there was this wave coming. And I also could see that, the work I've done so far, that Australia was actually ahead of the curve, right, of the US and the UK, and that we had a real opportunity. And so the kind of driving thing came, hey, this is a once in a generation opportunity that, if we do this right, our kids are going to have something incredible, right? And so the focus and the purpose became making Australia the #1 destination for FinTech innovation, the #1 country in the world. Now that's huge and it's audacious, but it's actually not about me. And it's not just about me making it happen. It's about me playing a part in that and, being part of that story. And I think that was the kind of, they talk about the pain and the pleasure principle, and the kind of moving from and the moving towards. And I think that was the kind of rocket fuel that I had to then kind of push off. And that focus of, right, great, because when I started the business, I had that same fuel. But the problem was, it just like, after takeoff, I didn't get out of orbit. So you had that massive energy just dissipated, and then you just kind of dropped back down. Whereas I think with the focus of having, here's the badge, this is the industry in, this is all you're doing, here's the energy, then, you got lift off, you got out of orbit, and you started to kind of get the momentum where it became easier and things started to really get some traction.
So then I want to jump straight to how that's now looking on the court, right? So on the court, here you are this year, and it has been a difficult year, right?
Yep.
That's obvious.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think this is kind of one of the things I want to touch on as well, which is, again, it's really difficult for leaders to grasp.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is not everybody's having a hard time.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right. Not everybody is. And
yes,
we've seen instances where top performers in some of our clients pre-COVID went into lockdown and just felt the bits. Right. And it was just, hey, well, they're top performer. They've smashed it. They don't need our support. We got to help those that are, who were struggling. Now, ironically, the ones who were struggling seem to have really come into their own, right? when they've gone into lockdown. And so, look, so I think it's,
I resonate.
Yeah. So look, I think it's just, but this is one of the challenges, right? It's like everything's always been formulaic, right? You do this, you'll get the result. That's not how it works anymore. But, personally, we've had our biggest year ever. When lockdown happened, we just entered into a partnership with FinTech Australia, which is the peak body for FinTech. They do fantastic work around governance and advocacy and driving policy. And the podcast that I had at the time, I think we'd done 5 episodes. And when COVID happened, we could see that all of the great work that had been done over the last 3-4 years was in serious threat, right? We could see that startups were going to fail, and they probably had about 3 to 6 months. They weren't going to get capital, because who's going to be dishing out capital in this environment? And so we got together and said, what can we do about this? And so there were a few things that we did. The first one was, I decided to just go, right, we're going to 10x the podcast and do 2 to 3 episodes per week. And anybody that's raising capital, anybody that's got a good news story, let's get it out there, right? Let's kind of keep, right? Let's keep kind of momentum. Let's not let a virus, right, kind of beat us. The other thing that we did was we built a kind of platform and a LinkedIn group for anybody that did lose their job in the industry. We were going to hook them straight up into those companies that were hiring. Because what we wanted to do was to keep the talent in the industry, try and keep jobs. And we had all of because we've got such talented people in the industry and they really are at the forefront of innovation. We had all the banks, circling around thinking, we're going to pick the best talent. So we wanted to stop that from happening. And that was all done at cost to us, but we didn't charge anything for it. It was like, hey, look, we just want to make this, keep the industry alive. And on the other side, FinTech Australia did an incredible job of lobbying government to make sure that JobKeeper was going to be applicable to startups, because how the government had put it out, no startup would have been eligible for it. And they did an amazing job. Like Rebecca, the CEO, I mean, she's saved literally hundreds of jobs, right? So this was all happened in March and April. And I've never worked harder in my life. I was doing 16-hour days, 6-7 days a week. We had the kids at home doing schooling, but I was just on a charge. It was saying, look, we just, we just got to make this happen. Now, funnily enough, I had a lot of my competitors saying, wow, this is genius marketing. And I'm like, I'm not doing any marketing here. I'm actually just trying to keep, do my bit to kind of fulfill, the mission and the purpose and the thing that we set out to do. Now, ironically, what has happened is, we've not only retained clients, but we've won new clients. And I can only think that, look, that kind of exposure that we got, people could see that, hey, these people are different. They're doing something differently. But also, look, we're actually really good at what we do as well. And look, it's kind of ironic, right? Because I shared that story with you about the miner when I was 8 years old. And I kind of look and I go, wow, I wonder if I'd have responded the same way had I have not met that person 8 years back. Oh, sorry, when I was 8 years old. Because it was kind of drawn inspiration from, I was feeling the same way as I was an 8-year-old kid. Desperate. I've seen what mass unemployment looks like.
Yeah.
We're facing it now. Like, what do I do? How do I respond?
Mm. So we could keep talking because there's so much fabulous stuff, but I just want to get to a point now where we're going to flip to complete. I'm going to come and ask you about your view on what a great leader looks like. But the thing I do want to just complete on in what you just said about that is actually quite extraordinary. And often people don't get that this is part of vision. But one of the things that shapes our vision is seeing that vision, whilst there's a view about, technically speaking in business, vision is creating what the future looks like, right? What does that look like?
Yeah.
Technically speaking, there is a correlation between what we see the future looks like and everything that we've accumulated in our view of how we see the world.
Yeah.
Our entire life.
Yeah.
And hence why there's no accident. It's always serendipitous, and we have that view at some point that everything was, you get to that point where you look back and you go, it was all actually meant to be, it was all done intentionally. And whilst we kind of, that lends itself to saying, well, that's because what's happening out there in the universe is serendipitous. And it's like, well, actually, no, consider that it's actually because what you're looking for is showing up.
Yeah.
It's not because how somebody else
there's no secret to it, right? Like the secret and that big phenomenon and all this stuff, right? And I was brought up a Catholic. I'm not a religious person, but I do believe in a higher intelligence. And I think that higher intelligence is, humans' gift of being able to imagine.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
Right? And
yes.
I remember, whilst my dad is not really the greatest role model, there was always something that he used to say to me, which was like, perceive, believe, achieve.
Right.
But he also used to say to me, fake it till you make it. Right? And that never, ever, ever sat well, right? It never, ever, exactly. It never sat well. But what I have done is I've been able to kind of evolve that, fake it till you make it, say, believe it until you make it. Because if you don't believe it, you're not going to make it. And I know this sounds all Tony Robbins-ish, and it's not what I'm trying to kind of bestow on people.
Yes.
And it's really difficult, particularly when you're stressed and you can't see the wood for the trees. But sometimes, if you can just take yourself out of it, breathe, stop, right? Not think. And that's like, if you talk about the serendipitous thing, I had people for 18 months who, were trying to do the right thing by me, going, hey, here's some great advice. Here's some great advice, right? Yeah. And now I'm going, oh, this is serendipitous. It's like, no, you were just pig ignorant, right? And you had a massive ego. Oh, God. And you thought you knew everything, right?
Yeah. Well, we do, right?
Yeah.
Until we don't.
Yeah. And so, look, I don't think there's really kind of this magic formula. And going to a Tony Robbins course for a weekend isn't going to change your life. Believe me, I've done it. It's good fun. But look, like jumping around, it was like going to a rave when I was in my 20s, right? It was really good fun. But it didn't, I came out on the Monday and I was like, all right. I wish I hadn't have bought that course. Oh,
oh God.
And look, I think the ironic thing is, Kylie, though, right? When you're there, they'll say to you, oh, well, come to this course. That's enough. Now you've got to get a coach.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I did take from that was to go, I do need to have coaches, right? And so I'm going to give a plug for your business here.
Oh.
And it's not because I'm plugging your business. It's because it's something that I do. And it's something that I've found has been transformational, not only for me, but also for my wife as well. We've got coaches where I've got a strength coach. It was like, all this thing, wanting a six pack and all of that stuff. What I then changed and I reframed that was, I want to be strong, right? I want to be able, like an oak tree, right? Nothing's going to knock me down, any storm. And so, that physical manifestation had to be not about building muscle, but about getting strong. And this guy's worked with me, Matt Cabrera is his name, on the northern beaches of Sydney. Awesome. He's worked with me to build core, and I've never been stronger. So I'm stronger now in my mid 40s than I was in my mid 20s. I've got a kind of business coach who is a expert in neuro-linguistic programming, got a PhD in brain science. And not only has she helped me, but she's helped my wife as well. And the shifts are so subtle that you don't see them until you look back a year ago and you go, wow, when this would have happened a year ago, you and I would have blown off at each other. Now, how do we respond?
Yes.
And then you look at the bank balance, right? And then you look at your pipeline of work, and then you look at all of the other stuff that you've achieved, right? And you start to recognize that there isn't this formula. What it's about is it's about connecting so many different dots and elements, right? And kind of nurturing and nudging and moving until then you find the formula that's right for you. And believe me, I've read all the books and I continue to read them, and you get your nuggets of wisdom. But ultimately, I think you have to kind of, formulate what works for you. And the only way that you can do that is through trial and error and having a coach, right? Not a recruiter who understands the market, who's going to tell you what the market's doing, right? If you wanted to, let's say you're selling your house, right? You go to a real estate, or you're buying a house, you go to a real estate agent to tell you what the market's doing. You don't go to them for financial advice and to get a mortgage. For that, you go and see a mortgage advisor who's the right person to help you. And I get so many people come to me for career advice. And I'm like, look, I'm not a coach, right? If you're earning $300,000 a year plus bonuses, you're on $500,000 package. Over the next 10 years, that's worth $5 million to you. Why are you putting that in the hands of somebody who you've never met before, who has no qualifications to guide you on this? You've got to go and see somebody who's a specific coach. What concerns me, right? It's like I see these executives that spend more at Bunnings at the weekend than they do on a coach and a career and their professional development.
Oh, sorry, I shouldn't laugh, right? It's not funny.
No, it's the truth.
No,
it's the truth,
right. Yeah, no. Look, you've brought up a big pain point for me. I don't get it. Like there's a lot I speak, and it's so ironic because I would never have, I did not notice that this was going to come out of my mouth, right? And I have no gender bias on anything whatsoever. But it's there automatically in the background whenever things show up, right? And so the last couple of days, there's been two individuals in particular who I know are really dealing with some stuff, like big stuff. Not only managing teams through some really, a crisis, shutting down businesses. But, on the one hand, it's, well, my business, from a business perspective, I'm doing all right, we're working through it, but my, things at home aren't so great. And I sit there and I think to myself, well, for me, it was very much like my husband. I'm like, man, why don't you get some help? Why do you suffer through this shit? Like, you just got a high tolerance for shit or what? Like, why?
Well, look, I mean, Kaylee, right? We're talking about the gender gap, and we're working hard to try and decrease the pay gap. But there's a way more important gender gap that I think needs to be addressed, and that is guys are 4 times likely to commit suicide.
I know.
And females, right?
Yep.
And I've lost 3 friends in the last 12 months. It's like, it's so insane, right? Look, it's like, but for a guy, it's like, look, it's kind of par with the course now. Yeah. And I think this is, as you've pointed out, one of the reasons why is because we just, we keep everything, right? Like that pressure, right, of being the man and looking after the family.
Yes.
I've been there, right? I can tell you that. And F's with your head, right? Like in a serious way. Yes. I had to go and get counseling and, unearth issues that, from being a 7-year-old kid, right? In the relationship that I had with my dad, it was dismantling all of this stuff, right? That, you'd built up and you'd kept it, and you'd, in some ways it had been an energy source for you. But then it got to the point where it was psyching me out, because I always said, hey, I'm never going to be that person. And then there were events that were happening in my life that I then correlated and said, oh, well, this happened to that person too. So therefore I must be becoming them. And this is not what I want, right? This, like I vehemently said, is this who I am? And it just screws with you, right? And I think the big thing that I took from that is nobody can avoid events in their life. Absolutely no one. But what you can control is how you respond. And you're going to ask me about what I think about leadership. And I'd put an answer in there. Yes. But I think the real answer, right, the one that I think I actually believe in without trying to sound intelligent, is the leaders are judged by how they respond, right? Because you can say anything that you want about how you're a leader. And believe me, I've interviewed thousands of them. And then I'll go and talk to their staff. And they're not that person, right? So what you think you are is not how others perceive you. And nor should they, right? Because if you're managing 100 people or leading thousands of people, why are they all going to think the same thing about you? So it's just the most ridiculous thing ever. And so I think the key for me is, you know, what's a great leader? Well, Donald Trump is actually a great leader for almost half of the population of the US. Now, not the kind of leader I want to follow, but actually a lot of people do, right? We could go back further in history, right? Dictators, you know, great leaders, but that is not the type of leader that I want to be, nor the type of leader that I want to follow. And so I think this is the biggest challenge that's facing leaders right now is, look, you know, we talk about authenticity and, you know, like what happened to just the word genuine, right? I get people who send me their resume and they say the first thing, I'm authentic. Well, the fact that you actually happen to tell me that you're authentic would suggest to me that you're actually not.
Yes.
Right. And it's like, there's just these bingo, you know, buzzword bingo of, you know, this is who I am as a leader, rather than saying, what is it that I stand for?
Yes.
Right. How do I respond in this situation? What is the way in which, you know, if you look at what's happening across the water in NZ, right? I talked about female leadership in Margaret Thatcher earlier. And then you've got the absolute opposite in Jacinda Ardern, who, look, I mean, you know, to deal with what she's had to deal with such love, compassion, grit, determination, and getting results, right? It's like, I think the world has to stand up and look and say, hey, you know, there is another way. And I just think, you know, what we're seeing now, I truly believe that we're at the beginning of a wave of, you know, a new way of society treating each other.
Yeah, yeah. Well, on that note, Dexter, I want to just really extend my gratitude for the conversation and for everything that you've shared with us today. And I'll use the word genuinely. You know, and we didn't end up talking about any of it. And seriously, I think we could have talked for another hour easily based on some of the things that you did say that I didn't actually stop and ask you about, you know, and I just want to extract a couple of things in particular. Firstly, my deepest condolences for what you had to deal with the people that you lost. I do know exactly how that feels.
Yeah.
And in saying that, I also want to acknowledge your willingness to, you know, to share your personal experience as a male and the reality of what it is often like for men who, and not only men, but predominantly men, but then also those who are in senior leadership positions, who often feel like they're alone and unable to really communicate who they are in the world.
I got to tell you, right, I meet with hundreds and hundreds of execs each year.
Yeah.
Right. We'll have coffee. And I guarantee you, whether it's the person who's in the CEO of the 20-person startup that the banking exec is worried about is going to disrupt their business, they're all worried about the same thing. Right. Yeah. And there's generally three kind of, I'd say, common threads. One is what we're doing today even going to be relevant in 12 months' time? And this was pre-COVID, right? The world was moving that fast.
Yeah.
The second is imposter syndrome. Right? Am I really good enough? How did I get the job? Yeah, I'm not as good as people think that I am. I'm making this up as I go along, right? Look, yeah, it's kind of everybody's in the same boat.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the third is, look, I'm really struggling to figure out how to communicate with people. And I think the reason why is, you know, everybody's got such strong opinions now, right? And I always laugh about, you know, people talk about millennials, like, 20% of the world thinks and acts the same way because of the age bracket that they're in. And it's utter nonsense, right? I mean, it's just insane, right? And, millennials are too hard to deal with, and they're too hard to manage. And it's like, look, they're learning faster than you are, right?
Yes.
You're not teaching them what they need. You're not being, right? You're not inspiring them, right? That's not their problem. That's yours.
Yeah.
And what you're saying to them is, you shouldn't aspire and develop and grow as fast as you are because it took me longer than you to get to where I am. What kind of leadership is that?
Yeah,
It's nuts, right?
Can of worms of a conversation.
Yeah. And so what I'm seeing is, and I hate this thing around getting a mentor. Like, mentors are everywhere, right? Like, you just got to watch somebody and just watch what they do and just learn, right? And observe and absorb it. And what I've found is I'm actually learning more, from people in their 20s than I am from people who are the same age as me. And I'm seeing people who, with 7 years experience, have achieved and built things that somebody with 30 years experience has got nowhere near doing.
Yeah.
And I think, rather than being scared of that, and you got kids, I got kids, I'm sure if you watch how they learn, they just go on YouTube and it's like, they've mastered stuff. And I constantly go at my kids, how'd you learn that? I just went on YouTube. So, it's awesome, right? I mean, it's incredible. And yet I look at our generation, right? And we're scared of learning.
Oh God.
We're scared of everything. New things. Yeah, we are.
Yeah.
And rather than embracing it and going, hey, just learn a language or, learn how to play an instrument. It's like, oh no, I haven't got the time, or I'm rushed off. I'll lie on the sofa and play this crappy game on my for 2 hours. But I haven't got any time. I got no time.
Speaking of time, we have to go.
We've massively overrun.
It's been fantastic talking to you.
It's been great.
So seriously, thanks for the contribution that you've been and everything you've shared, and so much gold in it. And I think what we will do too, Dexter, is I think we'll take a lot of this and try and break it down for people, share bits by bits as well, because I think there's so much gold for so many different people, whether they're in leadership, whether they're aspiring for leadership, the challenge that we have on ourselves fundamentally. So thanks for making the time. You're welcome. And look, the last thing I would say to anybody that's listening is, if you don't have a coach, get one, right? It will make a massive impact in your life. Yeah. Subtle at first, but the results will be way beyond the changes you make will be very subtle. Yes. But the results will be much bigger. Yep. Okay. Well, on that note, thank you. You're welcome. Thanks.